Hey folks, and welcome to today's video. It is my reading wrap up for July. I think I read predominantly audiobooks all month, and I think maybe only 2 of those total books were physically read rather. I had a lot going on in the month of July. I went to Amsterdam for a week, I went camping for a week, and yeah, there was just a lot going on. So audiobooks definitely was the mode for me. That was the thing that was getting me through all of these. So another thing I was doing was a challenge, which was Horrify in July, and I was basically just reading books that fit the theme. Not all of them were horror books, but I did kind of want to focus more on horror books during the summer, because I've been having an itch to do that. So yeah, Horrify in July, I read quite a few for that, and I can quickly show you now actually, because I just posted on Instagram. So yeah, I'll talk about all the books properly in a second. So I will, if I remember that is, go through what book fit for what prompt as I go along. So the first audiobook I listened to in July was The Inheritance of Orchida Divina by Zoraida Cordova, and this one I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. It fit the prompt for the witch theme in Horrify in July. So it alternates between Orchida's past and her descendants' present, as it explores what we knowingly and unknowingly inherit from our ancestors and the ties that bind us and reclaiming our power. It is fantasy, so there's a lot of, I would say, more like magical realism, because the fantasy is never like outright in your face. It's more like these powers that are laying sometimes dormant within the descendants of Orchida. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. So I found it incredibly enchanting, just the way it was written, everything about it, the lore of itself, how Orchida became like a legend even as she was living. I just thought was very enchanting. I did find it difficult to keep track with the amount of characters that we had, and I probably would have benefited from like a timeline or a family tree or something like that, and probably reading physically alongside it, just because there was a lot of detail in all the relationships there. But nevertheless, I did enjoy it. I really loved the chapters that were exploring the past, as there were answers unveiled that characters in the present wouldn't have known the answers to, basically. I think even when I couldn't keep track of what was happening, as there were some moments where things were getting a bit convoluted for my brain to catch up to, I couldn't deny that there was this rich depth to the storytelling, and just overall beauty to the tale that was being told. Next up for July's Horror Summer Camp Book Club pick was The Saturday Night Ghost Club by Craig Davidson. This is another book that I borrowed from the library, listened to it on audiobook. Prompt for Ghost for Horrify in July. So it's a coming of age story about a group of misfit kids who spend an unforgettable summer investigating local ghost stories and legends. I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. It had me in the mind of like Goosebumps and Spooksville, and it just felt really nostalgic, especially with the setting being during summertime, and that 80s kind of summer camp horror just was magnified beautifully in this. The uncle I found to be so lovable, and I love the concept that he engaged the children in these spooky stories and legend, but I also really was blown away by the depth and the turn of the stories as the main story progressed, and kind of what it revealed by the end. And due to that, the last 5% was extremely shocking and emotional for me. Next up, I jumped back on to the Skullduggery Pleasant books. I actually had the physical copy of this that my cousin loaned me like around Christmas last year. So we had Barbie booked and planned, and I knew that I wanted to give it back to her then, so I didn't have it hanging around for ages, and I didn't just, you know, I could give her back her book even though she didn't really care. But that book was Deathbringer by Derek Landy, and that fit the prompt for zombie. But to be honest, this could have fit the prompt for many. It could have done mad scientist, it could have done apocalypse, it could have done psychological. Like, there was so many that it could have fit into. Stalker, I probably could have done that if I was really like stuck for books to put in, but I'd rather have wanted to use just one per prompt. Anyway, necromancers no longer need Valkyrie to be their Deathbringer, but they found someone much more worse. This one I gave an overall rating of 3.5 stars. I was definitely lost for the most part, just because, again, as usual, it had been so long since I was in the world. But regardless of that, a lot of fun being back in the Skullduggery Pleasant universe. The Vile storyline particularly was pretty cool, and we had some awesome battle scenes that were action-packed and super immersive. The next audiobook I listened to is one where I actually have quite a few quotes for. And this is The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert, and it's YA fantasy, living life mostly on the road. Alice and her mum always seems to tempt bad luck, but when Alice's author of a cult classic dark fairy tale book, grandmother, dies, she realises just how bad her luck really is. I gave this one an overall rating of 4, and it fit the prompt for monster. So I really love dark fairy tales anyway, and I think the atmosphere that this story had was just written perfectly for what it was trying to achieve. The storyline I found to be completely enchanting, compelling, entertaining, dark. Like, it was just all those key words that I look for in a fairy tale, particularly a dark and twisted one. I think the story within a story was handled very well. There was no confusion or over complexity that often can happen when you try to have more depth in terms of a story within a story within a story. This one, you know, Melissa Albert did perfectly well for that. I think I personally would have enjoyed a deeper exploration and some closure for some of the threads of relationships that were introduced and made within this storyline, but that's kind of more of like a minor improvement, I guess. I personally like closure in my books. I don't like open-ended ended, so that's kind of definitely just a me thing. So I'm going to read 2 quotes, and the first one I'll pick is, "A woman so pretty it felt like a trick. Her head was shaved and she wore no jewellery. There was nothing to protect you from her face." And the last one I will read here is, "I remembered less from my own life than I did from the books I read." And I think many a reader can relate to that. I find particularly sometimes I have these vivid memories and I'm like, was that a dream inspired by a book that I read like in my early years of life, or did that actually happen? And sometimes they're like not as fantastical, so it really does fog my mind, as if, was that real or was it not? So I really related to that quote, and hence why I wanted to share that with you here. Okay, and then I stumbled on the world of, well, Slappy world really, Goosebumps subgenre of Slappy the puppet. I read a couple of books from him or about him, and yeah, so you're gonna hear a lot of talk about those books here and there. I think I read a total of like 5, but I read 1 to 4 and then I read number 8 or something like that. We'll get to it. The first of those being Slappy Birthday to You by R.L. Stine. It's bad enough that Ian has to spend his 12th birthday with his sister and annoying cousins. When he gets a slappy dummy, things get far worse for him. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars, and it fit the prompt for dark magic. Super fun, fast and creepy read. It was like a 2-hour book, audiobook, maybe like half that with my double speed. The bratty cousins really got on my nerves, but it was just a fun, quick, easy to absorb kind of read. I followed that up with the second book in the series. They're all like, I would say you can read them in any order because they're not really connected like that, or as far as the ones that I've read, I didn't see any like major connection. They're all their own standalone stories. But anyway, the next one was Attack of the Jack, and this one is about Violet and Devon, who are visiting their uncle for the first time, discover a locked pirate's chest. Of course they want to open the chest. This one I actually gave a 2 stars, but it fit for the prompt of survival. It's not one that really had me intrigued. I just didn't really care about what was going on, to be honest, and it was just kind of a mindless listening. I think I had it on whilst I was at work, and I wasn't really paying much attention to it, to be fair. I think the only other physical book I read during July was volume 2 of Something is Killing the Children by James Tinian VI. I still don't know with my Roman numerals, they just don't stick in my head like that. Erica may have slain the monsters of Archer's Peak, but the horror is far from over. I gave this volume a 4 out of 5 stars. It was perfect for the prompt of body horror. These are gory comics, and I really enjoy them. This was a really good sequel. I think I read the first one literally the month before this, and I instantly ordered what I could find. I liked that we got a bit more expansions on the organisation behind the monster killing, and kind of the lore of that, and also how Erica was brought up. I think it can contribute a bit more to her character and why she is the way she is in some regards. So yeah, it was interesting to kind of see that a little bit more, and I'm hoping that gets expanded on further still in volume 3. I do have a quote for this one, and it was quite sad. I just feel numb, like I'm not even in my body, like I'm just sitting behind myself watching my body see all these horrible things. Back into Goosebumps Slappy world with I Am Slappy's Evil Twin, which was number 3 of Slappy World Goosebumps books. It's fun having a dad who makes horror films until the horror gets a bit too real. This one I ended up giving a 3 out of 5 stars, and I used it for the prompt of psychological. It was fun, chill. The dad annoyed me near the end though, but yeah, it's one of those things. I'm not going to remember it, but it was fun whilst I was in the story. Following that, I listened to the audiobook for The Poison Season by Mara Rutherford. Outsiders are always given a choice, the forest or the lake. Either way, they won't make it back. We follow Lilo, a character on this island who just wants more from life that the island can give. She's curious, she's interested in what's beyond, she's questioning why it is the islanders are so isolated from the mainland, and why it is they treat the outsiders the way that they do, even when it's from originally inside that they sort of banish people to make them outsiders. She wants to know why it works that way, and she kind of believes that there's a corrupt mindset and thinking quite early on in the story. So it's interesting to see her kind of breaking apart from like the sheeple, I guess you could say. I gave this story a 4 out of 5 stars and used this one for cult because the characters on the island definitely had this kind of cultish vibe. It was more like they were worshipping the forest and that, but it was in the more of a toxic way. It wasn't like in harmony with it. It just felt kind of sinister and wrong. Anyway, the grimdark fairy tale atmosphere was spot on. You can tell I did pick a few different dark fairy tales for July's reading, and I just really enjoyed being in those worlds. And the siren-like magic of Endla's inhabitants, Endla is the island that I was mentioning earlier, was really well expressed. I love anything to do with mermaids, so even though we didn't have like mermaids or actual sirens as we know it here, the power lies in the inhabitants of the island of Endla's voices, and the enchantment that they can carry when they sing. So I thought that was a fascinating kind of lore and almost a new spin on siren lore, mermaid lore, and I really enjoyed that kind of fresh new take on it. Familial relationships were really tricky and complex, and I really commend the author for exploring that well and kind of not shying away from those difficulties within, you know, family relationships. I really loved Lilo as a main character. I thought she was just a delight, and you know, she was a just individual, but not so just it's like, oh my gosh, she's so pure and perfect, we must find a way to save her. She had her flaws, she had her curiosities, she just felt like believable, I would say. Right, back to Goosebumps with The Dummy Meets the Mummy, and this one I used for the prompt of free space, which I just used as mummy. After being put back to sleep in an old museum, Slappy is awoken by a curious girl on a school trip. This one, unfortunately, is another one of the 2-star reads. It felt like a trio of short stories, but all of the short stories just didn't grasp my attention to the extent that I would have enjoyed. It was, again, okay whilst I was in the story listening, but it isn't memorable at all. And even when I was reading it, or listening to it rather, it just, I could feel myself like hazing out, and I wasn't fully aware. That sounds awful, doesn't it? I wasn't always fully aware whilst I was in the story. Following on, I've jumped on to book 8. That one was number 7 or number 8, but following on from that I jumped on to book 8 or 9 of the Goosebumps Slappy World, and that is Diary of a Dummy. This one I used for the prompt of Demon. Reading someone's diary is bad, but Slappy is already evil. How could anyone resist finding out all of this dummy's terrifying secrets? This just got worse for me, unfortunately, and at this point I already knew that I weren't going to carry on. I mean, so much so that I jumped ahead, you know, within the series. But I gave this one a 1 out of 5 stars. Again, easy background noise, but not much else, and I don't really have an interest in picking them up. They were fun whilst they started, and they didn't last, unfortunately. My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. This is a adult horror, I would say, but it felt more YA, I think. I used this for the prompt of serial killer. In a quickly gentrifying rural lake town, Jade sees recent events only her knowledge of horror films could have prepared her for. It's described as Shirley Jackson meets Friday the 13th. I was kind of disappointed by this one. I thought I was going to absolutely love this, but it just was unexpectedly angsty, and just wasn't the sort of vibe I was expecting. I ended up giving it a 2 out of 5 stars. I didn't really know what was going on half the time, and I definitely, yeah, sort of lost interest as I was reading. Jade was completely unlikable, and that's not something that I usually kind of take and resent on. Over the last couple of years I found that I can enjoy a story with a dislikable character, but it was just so all-encompassing that I just couldn't see past that. Also, I found the ending seemed just out of nowhere. It just seemed completely, like, maybe not random, but just, yeah, I guess kind of random. I think eventually, maybe one day, I would revisit this, as I would like to go back and explore those deeper points a bit more, because there were definitely things that piqued my interest and I was like, oh, okay, what direction is this going to go? But because I had just general no motivation, or little to no motivation as we went on in the story, that easily slipped out of my head, unfortunately. Okay, and the last book I listened to in July was Amy McCaw's YA Book Club 2023 pick, In Nightfall by Suzanne Young. This is a Lost Boys meets Buffy the Vampire Slayer kind of vibe. In the quaint town of Nightfall, it isn't the dark you should be afraid of, it's the girls. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars, and I got it with my Audible credit for the month, and it fit for the theme of vampire. This perfectly captures moody atmosphere to, you know, top levels. It was done so well. I adored learning about the lore of the town, the history and the legends, and it had some unexpected twists and turns that I really enjoyed. Again, there were some times that I would kind of losing interest a little bit, but it was not often. And when I did, I found myself no, snap out of it, I want to hear what happened, and I would rewind it and listen to it again. Overall, 4 out of 5 stars. It was a solid read. So that is it for all the books I read in July. Let me know what you read, what your favourite book was potentially, and thank you so much for watching. I shall speak to you in another video soon. Bye!